All right, welcome to Board Certified, expert interview episodes about medical licensing exams and healthcare careers. I'm Tyler, the founder of Achievable, and we offer affordable adaptive online prep courses for the USMLE Step 1, MCAT, PTCE, and NPTE, among others. That's everything you need to succeed, including comprehensive study guides, video lessons, thousands of practice questions powered by our spaced repetition algorithm, and full-length practice exams. You can try any course for free at achievable.me, and if you like it, use the code podcast to get 10% off. Now, let's get started. Today we've got Shirag Shemmassian, which I hopefully did not butcher, joining us on the show, and I'd love if you could introduce yourself and your background.
Yeah. So I tell people, Tyler, all the time that even my wife can't say it perfectly. So I'm certainly not going to hold you to a different standard than that. But yeah, I'm excited to be with you today. Been guiding students with the admissions process with medical school and residency for over 20 years now, and really assist students with developing a stronger extracurricular profile, academic profile. Been serving students with MCAT prep and test prep across the board for a long, long time. And happy to chat with you today about how residency has been changing and where it stands today.
Yeah, thank you. And where's the easiest place for people to find you after this episode?
Yeah, sure. So shemmassianconsulting.com or just shemmassian.com will route you there. I know that doesn't roll off the tongue. I'm sure you'll include it in the show notes, but it's shemmassian.com. We'll take you there.
Great. Yeah, fantastic. So today we're going to be talking about residency. And the thing that has become pretty clear is that residency has changed a lot. And in particular, it's been changing a lot recently. The big thing being the USMLE changing step one to a pass fail. But I think there's also just been other changes more broadly in kind of what specialties are popular and what's being emphasized in the admissions process. So where do you want to start? What are the big ticket items for what's changing right now?
Yeah, so residency admissions is rapidly changing. I think that's been true for a long time, actually. But in recent years, we've seen many big changes happening all at once. And so, in some ways, it's unrecognizable versus, say, 5 to 8 years ago, even. So, big one that you identified off the top, Tyler, is with step one going pass fail, what that's done to the remainder of the application decision variables. Like step two scores are rising in prominence, and extracurricular profiles are more important than ever. And there are some other elements as well we could talk about. And that's a big one. In terms of the application system, having certain supplemental questions, that's changed. You have to involve geographic signaling on applications. So if you want to prioritize applications to programs in specific locales, and then the question becomes, well, which ones do I signal towards? And then does that put me at a disadvantage at the ones that I didn't signal, right? So we could talk about that. There's a ton. Certain specialties I feel like are just really increasing in prominence and popularity among medical students. Programs in, say, dermatology, anesthesiology is probably the biggest one. I'm seeing a rise in interest in OB-GYN, and we could talk about why that is. But that's also shaping the landscape because some specialties that were historically moderately competitive or maybe minimally competitive, relatively speaking, are now much more difficult than they were even 3 years ago. And so that also impacts how a student might approach this process. Do you apply to two specialties at once, et cetera? Just a lot. There's more in there. And each one of these areas is its own rabbit hole, but I'm sure we'll dig into it.
Yeah, logically going through it, I think that the best place to start is probably the specialties. And it's interesting. So you mentioned a couple of different things that are becoming more popular: anesthesiology, OBGYN. What is driving the change? I'm sure that some of it's just there's more jobs, but it might be more than that. So I'm curious what it is
Yeah,
that's different.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the ones that I have observed students expressing more and more interest in and also being worried about them being even more competitive. Dermatology has always been among the most competitive, but I think it's even more competitive now. I'll describe why in a little bit. The other ones, yeah, OB-GYN. I've seen a lot of rising interest also in internal medicine over the past few years. Now, I think that what's happening when you talk to students a little bit more of why they're interested or what's driving changes and stuff like that, a lot of it comes down to students being more attuned to work-life balance and life quality, I think at a younger age than they used to be, is my observation. Usually back in the day, you didn't hear 23, 24, 25-year-old talking about quality of life when they hadn't yet embarked on their career. They're really just looking at the specialty they're looking into and what is their area of interest. That was the primary driver. Of course, salaries and things like that were factoring in. But now students are thinking even more about, well, how can I have a more, let's call it a sustainable career, higher quality of life without sacrificing the pay piece? And they're thinking about that younger and younger. And you also think about some of the specialties that have become more popular. They also have an element of they're still procedural, or there's a procedural element to them. So, for example, dermatology has high quality of life. That's what a lot of physicians will report, high salary, but there's also a procedural element. So if you like to work with your hands, it's not, hey, I have to do something, say, surgical like neurosurgery or general surgery, or have no procedural focus like in neurology. There's a middle ground here that can be really effective for my career, and I could feel really satisfied. It's a lot of those driving it. But then there are, I think, societal factors as well, like the rise in OB/GYN. Maybe I'm speculating here a bit, but I think the rise in interest in women's health and reproductive health and reproductive rights and things like that is also probably driving students who feel an affinity towards supporting that population. That's probably driving students to OB/GYN. Internal medicine is really popular, I think, because you can go down different paths after. So maybe students like the flexibility, or maybe they're postponing their decision on what they want to do ultimately. And doing internal medicine gives you a lot of choice there. Do I become an internist, a hospitalist? Do I go into cardiology after, etc.? So it could still leave a lot of doors open. So each one has unique factors as to why students are being driven towards them. But these are some of the reasons I hear pretty routinely behind this drive.
Yeah, and I think that is a good just follow-up question for that for me is you mentioned, for instance, internal medicine, you can punt your decision, you can continue going in different directions. I also feel like I'm curious, regardless of which specialty you're in, or does it depend on which specialty you're in, kind of what parts of the healthcare world are open to you, right? If you're like, for instance, a surgeon, I think that you're probably working in hospitals and hospitals only, or something like that. So I'm curious, do you feel like that's a part of it? Like people either wanting more flexibility of where they could work later in terms of types of businesses, or am I overthinking
It's a great point, and I'll just say that point is less frequently verbalized to me,
this?
but I think that the flexibility piece is absolutely a factor. And you're right, if you're a surgeon, typically you're not opening your own surgery practice with all the machines and tools and all that kind of stuff because it's very expensive and high liability and things of that nature. But as far
Right.
as the general flexibility in terms of hours, locations, things of that nature, absolutely playing a role in it.
Yeah, and then are there specialties that are losing favor? Like, for instance, I'm just looking at our old blog post with a list of USMLE Step 1 scores by program, which I'm using as a proxy for competitiveness. And at the top was plastic surgery. Is that becoming less popular now? Are other things such as orthopedic surgery or pathology or things like that becoming less popular? Or is it more just that you've noticed it rise in just a certain ones? And is there
No,
kind of any
yeah,
reason why?
yeah, great question. So I think essentially the flip side to what we've been discussing. So a lot of the heavy duty surgical specialties you hear about slightly less than before. General surgery, neurosurgery, orthopedics a little bit. These kinds of things come up less. I feel like radiology comes up a little bit less these days. You hear about radiology a lot more in terms of applying machine learning tools for like image recognition and things of that nature, but students expressing interest in
Yep.
being a radiologist, that comes up a little bit less. So yeah, you've hit a bunch of them on the head. Pathology comes up a little bit less as well. So for sure, that's coming to play. And things like radiology and pathology, the stereotype is, well, I don't want to just be in a dark room most of the day, isolated from my peers or what have you. So I want something where I'm having that social relationship with people, having that nice work quality, that social work quality that I'm looking for. So it's really interesting. But then there are some folks who are like, wow, I could do my radiology work at home. everything can be done remotely. So if you're drawn to that,
Right.
then radiology might be of interest to you. But it's really interesting because, yeah, you would think that medical specialty interests would remain reasonably consistent over time. But as student priorities change and the healthcare landscape changes and what working in a hospital looks like changes with the pandemic as well, these are major influences for specialty selection.
Yeah, and we made it 11 minutes into the podcast without saying the words AI, but I'm sure you saw that radiology thing that went on. It went viral on Reddit anyway, where he was basically like, this AI did what I do for my job in radiology in about 10 seconds, and I probably won't have a job in 10 years. Do you feel like students are talking about that yet, or is that kind of overblown at this point?
Students, they don't talk about it a ton. I think that students are aware, at least they've heard the talking points out there of like AI is going to disrupt all of our jobs. None of our jobs are going to look the same in a few years. That's for sure. I think that
Not family
radiology,
medicine.
yeah, I think
Dealing
that
with kids, this is
radiology is
going to
just
be safe.
nothing is safe, right? No, but I think radiology is just, it offers the easiest example for most people to understand how disruptive AI can be for a field. I haven't seen a Reddit post about, hey, this AI tool oversaw and performed the entire surgery or something like
Right.
that. But image recognition software is probably easier to deploy and show that
Lower
example.
stakes.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But for sure. And maybe students are worried about what will happen to my job and things of that nature. And then you dig a little deeper and you have to say, well, it's not just about image recognition. It's also about, considering that information alongside all the other variables. And you still have to figure out the right treatment option and perform the right treatment and all those kinds of things. And clinician's position is still going to be incredibly valuable. And maybe you do it more accurately or more efficiently. You can see more patients that way, which of course hospital systems and insurance companies, all that kind of stuff would really value. But at the end of the day, AI in some form or fashion will impact everyone's work.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So then moving on from specialties, I want to talk about the geographies part. That was something that I thought was interesting where people want to signal because it'll help them with the areas in that signal area, but then they don't want to have it hurt them in the areas that they're not signaling. And I'm just curious, I am pretty naive to all of this stuff. So I'm just curious, what is this signaling that you're doing? How is it happening? Is it part of your application process, like in the Common App or something for college, where you're like, I want to be in the Northeast? How does it all work?
Basically, basically. So there's this process that's called geographic signaling or program signaling. And this was something that few specialties were using just a few years ago, and now it's spreading like wildfire. Essentially, you can signal to a certain set of programs that you want to be there. You're putting them at like the top of your list. I've never used a dating app where you swipe right or swipe left, but I think it's almost like a, hey, these are the ones that you're favoriting, and you get slight preferential treatment at those. And so that's really nice if you think about, well, these are the top programs that I'm looking into. But as this process gets more and more difficult, you also start to worry about, well, the ones I didn't signal, are they now going to think I wouldn't go there and therefore they're not going to interview me? Right? So
Mhm.
it's two sides of that same coin. And so when you go to the residency application, you list your mailing address on there for sure. You also list your home address, essentially like where you call home. And that may be different from your mailing address. It often is. And then additionally, you can do like the signaling. So let's say that I'm from California, I'm from Los Angeles, but I go to medical school in Ohio and I signal a school in a program in San Francisco, a program in New York, and a program in the DC area. What does that mean for me? Okay. So now my home state is California and my home address is in Los Angeles. And so you can think about it as, well, if I apply to programs in Los Angeles, they can reasonably assume I would go there because that's home, right? Programs in Ohio can reasonably assume that I would go to residency in Ohio based on the fact that I live in Ohio currently and I've shown I would continue to live in Ohio because I do. And then for the other ones, you've chosen, hey, Bay Area, New York, and DC because those are major population centers. Maybe there are a lot of programs in my desired specialty and all that kind of stuff. So now what you've done strategically is said, okay, I'm going to assume that the LA based programs and the Ohio based programs will look at me favorably because I have a connection to those. And I'm signaling places in these major population regions so that I can show folks in those areas that I would be excited about moving there. So that's how a lot of students will think about it. Now, they'll start to, sometimes students will worry though about a few things. Number one is the fact that I'm from LA, but not signaling to an LA program, would that make them more worried? Because why wouldn't an Angelino signal an LA program? So that's one of those things where students sometimes get into mind reading, let's call it. Like, what would that program think? The program's not one person. Their admissions committee comprises multiple people, and different admissions committees will handle things differently. So I always tell students identify the areas that have the largest number of programs there and signal at one of the ones that's of highest interest to you in that region. But then that brings up another thing that makes a student nervous. They'll say sometimes, I signaled to UC San Francisco, will that other program in San Francisco feel miffed that I didn't signal there? And so you have to make these decisions to the best of the preference that you're aware of and let the process shake out. I've seen because the process has become harder, students are casting a wider and wider net and applying to more and more programs. But I think using this kind of approach strategically has worked very well for our students. Playing the game to a degree, but not getting so obsessed where you don't signal to areas where you'd want to live out of fear of upsetting a program in another place, if that makes sense. So there's just a lot of moving pieces.
Yeah, do you feel like it's good to be thinking about this, or do you think it's kind of overblown?
I think it's good to think about it. But like that example I gave you, where if I'm from LA, go to school in Ohio, and signal that a program in the Bay Area in New York and DC, if in fact I would be interested in living in the Bay Area, New York, DC, LA, and the Ohio piece, I'm not going to signal, but they should reasonably assume that I would go there. I think that's an effective approach. Now, let's say that you really want to be in a specific region and you want to signal at multiple programs. Let's say I do one in LA, Orange County, and San Diego. So I stay within that 120-mile range of one another, right? Then fine, you could do that. But that might mean that, okay, so if we're seeing signals at those places and not outside, you're definitely prioritizing and improving your odds that you would be in Southern California. But that comes with a downside, which is other areas are not getting any signals. So it's a trade off. It depends on circumstances. Sometimes students will have young children or they're married to someone who really wants to go back to their hometown. And so you want to prioritize those kinds of things. So there's always going to be this kind of decision making process, but also you might want to signal to an area that has 6 programs versus just one program, because signaling at one program in region A might show the other programs in that region that you would go there. So you want to think about those. But of course, the places that you're really drawn to, they tend to be more popular places. Most people want to live in major cities and things of that nature, especially when you're really young, and all of those factors are playing into your decision process. So you want to think about it. You don't want to obsess too much where you're paralyzed by choice, but this is how we walk students through this decision.
Yeah, great. I think that's also probably a good time to maybe even parlay off of that topic to just talking more generally about the application process. Certainly, it is not going to be exactly the same as medical school applications. And I'm curious, not only how does it differ from what you've done before with the med school apps so that you should be prepared for it? And then also, what's new recently with residency apps going into this year?
Yeah. So the nice thing is that the medical school application process is far larger than the residency application process. So if people are experiencing really difficult memories of the medical school application process, the residency application process is not as large. So you're going to write fewer essays in total. There are going to be fewer program specific supplements. Chances are you'll get more interviews than you did for medical school admissions, which interviews there are at a major premium. So for residency admissions, you're going to write a personal statement. You're going to submit a version of your CV on through the ERAS portal, or certain specialties have their own application portals. So there's a version of a CV or expanded resume. You're going to have people who write letters of rec or clinical evals. Some specialties or programs may have supplemental questions or an addendum they'll ask you to complete. And that's how it works. And then you wait, you submit, and then essentially you get a bunch of interview invitations. That's the hope. And the vast majority of students will get several interview invitations. And then you rank the programs and they rank you, and you go through the match process. Essentially, it's an algorithm that will optimize for your preferences and the program's preferences. So let's say you rank, I don't know, UCLA's, I'm from Los Angeles, so I'll keep giving LA examples. Okay, let's say I ranked UCLA number one and UCLA ranked me number one. Cool, that's a match. Let's say I rank UCLA number one, but UCLA ranked me number six. So long as their choices 1 through 5 didn't match elsewhere, then I'll get that. So it's optimized to work in that way. And that's how the process shakes out. Versus with medical school, you can have multiple acceptances ideally and make a selection. Most students just dream of getting into one just because of how difficult it is. And typically students on the residency side get more interviews. So that's how the process plays out. Again, you're casting a wider net. You're applying to many more programs than in medical school. You're usually getting more interviews, and you rank. And you find out on match day where you're actually going to go based on what the algorithm spit out.
Hmm. Yeah, that's so interesting. And I'm curious, everything that you just mentioned, how does this handle couples, right? Because I've been told that it's pretty common for people to apply to the same residency together, or at least in the same city, if they're in a relationship. And oftentimes you get into a relationship in medical school because who else is going to understand what the hell you're going through besides other
And who
people in
else are
medical
you
school?
around, Tyler? Other people will
Right.
say, I don't meet anybody outside of my school.
Are you going to the bar? Probably not, right? You gotta go
Yeah.
study.
Or if you are, you're going with your classmates kind of thing. So yeah, so couple matching is a thing. And that happens with this process. Essentially, let's say me and my partner are applying to medical school. What we'll do is essentially we'll say, yes, I'm couple matching, and you put their name and they put your name. And now the computer algorithm knows to prioritize same geographic area. So you might be in program A in Boston and they might be in program B in Boston, but the goal of the algorithm is to match you to the same location, right? So that's how that works. And sometimes it can be difficult for students because if one person has a much more competitive specialty than another, or sometimes one member of the relationship is much more competitive applicant than the other one, and now you get into conversations with students of, hey, how are you guys thinking about this? Are you going to say, hey, look, we know person A has the more competitive specialty or they're the strongest applicant, so I'm going to go where they go. We're going to do our rank list in a way that prioritizes their success and my success will follow. Or do you do it differently? And these are real conversations that can happen. I'll bring up a weird detail here too, just in case people are thinking about couple match but worried about how it might shake out. Let's say you start off the application process by designating couple match and you break up during the application process, which I've seen before. That's okay. You can update the
It's
system and
gonna
say,
happen
I'm no longer,
statistically at some point, yeah.
yeah, you can say I'm no longer couple matching. So if you're on the fence, that's okay. You can always reverse that decision. But that's how it works.
And if you really want drama, you can say that without telling your partner. That sounds like a TV show premise.
Yeah, that's a whole lesson. That's a whole level of relationship management or advice that I don't get into, but
Yeah,
maybe for someone else out there.
great. Yeah, then the last thing we touched on at the very beginning, but the last thing with residency admissions is the step exams, USMLE Step 1 and 2 CK specifically. How has the context of them in residency applications changed?
Okay. So a few years back, step one went pass fail. So they used to have scores and percentiles, and then it went pass fail. Interestingly, it was meant to help students stress less and all that kind of stuff. I haven't observed students stressing less, like they still study to the same degree that they did before. But what that's done is a few things. Number one, it's put more weight on the other factors. So let's just say, for the sake of discussion, that there were 10 factors, including step one, that influenced an admissions decision. When you make step one pass fail, you're essentially removing that variable because everyone who passed the same way, it's not like there's a score that's reported. So the remaining 9 variables now increase in importance. I'm not saying to the same degree, but all the other 9 variables increase in importance. So what that's done is it has made step two much more heavily weighted because now that's the standardized testing variable that the admissions committees rely on. Instead of 2 tests, now they have 1 test to rely on. So that 1 test is more important.
Right.
And then, of course, the extracurricular profile, things like research production and other indications of a student's academic achievement level are more important today than they were before. So, for students who are wondering, well, how do I stand out on the academic front? It's get a higher step two score and produce more on the research front. And that's how you do it moving forward.
And you mentioned step one going past fail means that now there's just more emphasis on step two. Does that kind of defeat the whole purpose of making step one pass fail, right? Like
Yeah,
at this point?
this is the classic unintended consequence. You're like, I don't want them to stress out about this. Well, now they're stressing more about step two. And it's also increasing the emphasis on step two, just like you said. So, yeah, it's one of those things where there's a body of people who make this call, but then the admissions committees are still looking to evaluate students. And so they're going to rely on the variables they do have to make up for the loss of information with step one going pass fail.
Yeah. Well, great. And is there anything else that we haven't covered today that you feel like we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about?
These are the highlights, Tyler, from the last several years that we've seen with residency admissions changes. Of course, I'm always keeping my eyes open because I always say residency is like the Wild West, where each specialty can do things in their own way. They can change from year to year versus medical school admissions, which is far less fragmented. They all use the same application system. Other than supplemental essays being different, it's pretty consistent, whereas residency can be very different from specialty to specialty and from year to year. So we're constantly reviewing, staying on top of it, updating our website with this information. There might be new exams and hoops to jump through and all that kind of stuff, but we'll stay on top of it.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. This
My
has been
pleasure.
Board Certified, hosted by Tyler and Cassandra from Achievable with Shirag Shemmassian from Shemmassian Consulting. And Achievable has great online courses for the USMLE Step 1, the MCAT, PTCE, and PTE, among others, and you can try them all out for free by going to achievable.me.